You've probably asked at some point, could the Steelers trade this pick for that pick? We'll go over all of that. Trade ups, trade downs, all the options on the table right here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter, joined today by Wes Uhler of Steeler Nation Radio. Let's get into it.
You are Locked On Steelers, your daily Pittsburgh Steelers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, welcome to the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter, bringing you your daily dose of all things on the Pittsburgh Steelers. As always, you can find this show on your favorite podcasting platform or podcasting app. You can also find the show on YouTube. Subscribe to this show if you see it on YouTube, like this video, and check out all of our daily Monday through Friday episodes because we cover the Steelers daily. We're your team every day, and we hope that we're your first listen every day. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, the official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Make every moment more with FanDuel.com/LockedOn today to get started. As I said before, we're joined by Wes Uhler, our man from Steeler Nation Radio, all the West Virginia podcasts that exist in humanity. He runs them all. Wes is back. Wes, this time of the year, we're talking drafts, and it's that point where the combine hasn't happened, the pro days haven't happened, so we don't have all this information. Everyone's stacking the prospect that they think are going to be good, but all of that is about to not matter when these guys run. So what are we talking about? We're talking about trades. We're talking about, can the Steelers sign Jalen Ramsey? Crazy things like that. We're at this part of the year, though, I think there are ways to sift through the crazy thoughts and be like, okay, there is a new regime in the front office of the Pittsburgh Steelers. How aggressive could this team be in either direction of trades?
Well, that is a really good question. One that, we think we have some backdrop to. The Steelers have been a little bit more aggressive in that department over the last 3, 4, 5 years than they would traditionally be. But as you mentioned, Kevin Colbert is no longer at the head of things. That's now Omar Khan. You've also got Andy Weidel, who's got a major voice in everything that's going on. Brandon Hunt, no longer part of the equation, is him and Andy kind of high-fived on the turnpike as one went from Pittsburgh to Philly and the other went from Philly to Pittsburgh.
That's crazy.
But how aggressive will this regime be? And you know what? It's funny. The last time I was on here with you on Locked On, I think it was 2 weeks ago, I kind of talked about how, will the Steelers see this any differently with, we've got a rookie quarterback that we don't have to pay for another 3 or 4 years? Or do we want to load this thing up and really view this as a window for the next 4 seasons or so before we have to pay Kenny Pickett because we think we've got our guy, and that's kind of the salary cap cheat code now in the NFL, is to load up around your rookie quarterback who can win you games. Are the Steelers thinking that way, or are they thinking how they traditionally have over the decades of no single season is more important than any other? We're playing the long game. We play to contend every single year. We don't view anything as a window because we want every year to have championship possibilities, the chance to go to the playoffs, to win division titles, climb that ladder, so on and so forth. Chris, I think here in the next couple weeks, we might finally start to get that answer with this new regime because, as you mentioned, we're not at all those things yet, but we're kind of right on the precipice. I mean, next week is the combine. I'll be in Indianapolis. You'll be in Indianapolis a week from now. And then everything really gets rolling after there quickly. You've got free agency right after the combine, and then obviously the draft right around the corner. So that's a great question. That is, I think, kind of the big question of the offseason process for this new Steelers management. There's a lot of individual we can talk about, re-signing Cam Sutton, a lot of these different things, right? But I think the overarching question, I think you just nailed it, is this group going to be more aggressive? Are they going to do the traditional Steeler thing? And how do they view that as any potential, what you might call, window around a quarterback on a rookie salary, rookie deal?
I agree with you. That is basically what we're looking at here if they want to take that shot. And Omar Khan, he's already made the trade to get an extra pick. We'll get to that pick in a second. But I want to help people put things in perspective because there's always questions, and we're going to address 2 of our fan callers who called in and asked questions about different trade options for the Steelers. But whenever you're looking at trade options, people start saying crazy things like, oh, they could trade their first round pick and just move up to the 3rd overall pick and this, that, and the 3rd. So let's try to put values on things. And we do this every year. I did this last year with you, and I think you and I had this exact conversation about those picks. But one thing that I always point people to, I think that one of the best tools that's available for free and anyone that can use is when you go to drafttech.com, and that's draftek.com, and look up their trade value chart. And it's something that I felt has been accurate, has given a better description. It puts point values on everything that allow you to see, like, okay, if I'm trading for the 15th overall pick to get to the 8th overall pick, what other picks do I have to put in there to match the value to each other? For example, if the Steelers at 17 wanted to trade up with the Eagles at 10, the Steelers would have 950 points to the Eagles 1,300 points. So that would be that would cost them approximately, if my math is correct, 350 points that they'd have to add on there, which means they'd have to, their other picks that they would put in there would have to have that value. And of course, there's also players involved. I don't know if you caught my 13.
Good quick math. And I like how you chose those numbers too. Yeah. I'm surprised you really didn't. I'm surprised you didn't go with Detroit as an example with the flat 900.
I wanted to keep it Steelers centric, but I had to get in my 13-9 joke somehow.
That's pretty good. That was pretty good. It's a long play there by you. I like it.
Thank you. So let's look at, just so people can see that draft talk chart. I pulled it up here on YouTube. If you're watching, you can check it out. The picks in green are the Steelers' value, and I apologize, it's kind of small, but we're trying to make it so that we can show you that while we're still talking to you here on the podcast here. So the 17th overall pick in the chart has 950 points. The 32nd overall pick has 590 points. The 49th overall pick, which is the Steelers' actual second-round pick, has 410 points. Then you go to the 80th overall pick, it's 190, and then it gets smaller and smaller. FYI, those seventh-round picks being 1 point apiece. Mm-hmm. So, yep. That's what we're dealing with there. And then, of course, the Steelers' last pick before the 7th round is the 4th-round pick at 56 points. So, in comparison, like I said, the 10th overall pick being 1,300, the first overall pick is like 3,000. And the Steelers' total points, if you added all of their draft picks up together, is 2,198. So, according to this draft chart, the Steelers would be just close to, if they'd traded every single pick to getting the third overall pick.
The third overall pick, yeah.
With the Cardinals. So this is
crazy.
Where I'm at.
It's crazy how weighted those top 4 or 5 picks are.
It is. But I think that this draft is based off of history, and what it's taken, this draft chart is based off of history and what it's taken to get those picks when teams have traded for them. And of course, this doesn't count for future draft picks and things like that, but this is what you're looking at if you don't want to give up future draft capital to get draft capital this year. And that's something that the Steelers don't normally do. They do it on occasion when they want to make a move. But yeah, so that's what we're looking at here. So Wes, reasonably, if the Steelers were to move up, I don't think that they'd want to give up either their second-round picks. Maybe they'd want to give up their third-round pick because I do think they have enough needs. So if they're to give up their third-round picks, they'd only be really trying to be able to move up basically to the 15th overall pick. Well, wait a sec. My math sucks. They'd be able to the 14th overall pick with the Patriots. That would be that would be the closest that they could get according to this chart, and if they didn't throw any other value in there. That's why I just don't think trading up from 17 is a likelihood for the Steelers this year.
No, when you look at it in terms of value, and this is a great asset here that you use, it doesn't make a lot of sense. Now, when you start to look at trading up from maybe 32 or maybe from 49, you can see there, okay, you could move up 5 spots, 6 spots without giving up a king's ransom. But from 17, all of a sudden, if you just want to go from 17 to 11 or 10, like you were talking about with Philadelphia there, that's a substantial jump. You're going to have to give up one of your second-round picks to do that. Right. Whereas if you want to move up with one of your second-round picks, you might be able to do that, without giving up something that you would deem a huge asset. Maybe your 4th-round pick, something in that regard. So that, I think, is maybe more realistic on the table for the Steelers than moving up from 17.
Let's talk about that closer. Look at moving up from those 2 second-round picks. We'll get to that in just a minute here on the Locked On Steelers podcast, so don't go anywhere. But first, before we do any of that, we got to talk to you guys about our great sponsor at FanDuel. America's #1 sports book. And yes, again, FanDuel, it's past the midway point of the NBA season. The All-Star break is over, and it's time to get back to playing some hoops. It's time for you to get back to betting on hoops. And you could do that at FanDuel, where new customers can use the no-sweat first bet to get up to $1,000 in bonus bets back if your first bet doesn't win on the FanDuel Sportsbook app. So to go download the FanDuel Sportsbook app right now. It's safe, secure, super easy to use. And then you can bet on everything. That's from the money line to point scores to how many threes get made in a game. And FanDuel lets you make player prop bets that gives you so many options to bet on during games. Plus, FanDuel even lets you combine your bets for a chance at a bigger payout with same-game parlays. So don't miss your chance to get your no-sweat first bet up to $1,000 in bonus bets when you go to FanDuel.com/LockedOn. That's FanDuel.com/LockedOn to learn more. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of the NBA. Back here on the Locked On Steelers podcast, I'm your host, Chris Carter, joined by today from Wes Uhler, our man from Steeler Nation Radio. Wes, let's get into the question, the notion that you were bringing up here, because we had a caller call in and ask that very question, not trading up from 17, but trading up from 32 to get back into the first round. Here's Robert from Lakeland, Florida, asking that question.
Hey, Chris. Love the show. First-time caller. This is Robert. I live in Lakeland, Florida. Born and raised in Squirrel Hill, Pennsylvania. So, also a Alderdice alumni, 2002. So I just really wanted to touch base and thank you for all that you do. I really just had one simple question, and it's more of like an observation. What do you think the importance would be of the Pittsburgh Steelers using that second pick, the 32nd pick, and moving up into the first round again to get that fifth-year option? Thanks for taking my call, and look forward to hearing your response. Thank you.
So, first of all, shout out to Robert. I always love to hear from Taylor Alderdice grads, Taylor gang. Seriously, Robert, actually, thank you. And actually, I live in Squirrel Hill now, so holla at you. But to get to Robert's question, this is what you and I were poking at here, Wes. I can foresee a trade up into the first round much easier than trading up with that 17th overall pick to get in, and it not costing the Steelers too much here. Let's bring back up this chart for a second so that our viewers can get a look at it as we're talking about it. But so if you look at the chart right there, Draft Tech values the Steelers' 32nd overall pick that they got from the Chicago Bears, which is now the first pick of the second round, as a 590-point asset. The lowest values in the first round are the Chiefs with their last pick at 600 points, the Eagles next up with 620 points, the Saints at 640, the Bengals at 660, the Buffalo Bills at 680, and then the Dallas Cowboys at 26th overall with 700, and then it goes up in increments of 20 therein. If the Steelers wanted to get aggressive, according to this chart, and they wanted to move back up, because there is value in that. If you get the value of that extra fifth-year option on a rookie deal can be very helpful to control another player. It's something I think the Bengals are definitely going to take advantage of with Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase. That's something that should not be overlooked about what the Steelers have here. And if you're looking at this chart, they're 10 points away from having the value of the Chiefs pick. If they traded just their fourth-round pick, they'd be looking at, 646 points, which would put them at potentially the Saints pick. So they could get with the Saints, the Eagles, or the Chiefs there. Now, those teams may want to hold on to those picks because they've got
to be willing to dance. Yeah,
exactly. It's not a guarantee, but this is what you and I were talking about. You could do that. You could also, if you really wanted to be aggressive, use that third-round pick and say, hey, 190 plus 590, that's 690 plus 90 is 780. You hear me doing math in my head. That gets you up to like the Ravens level pick 20s, at the 22nd overall pick. That, I think, could be really interesting, having those two picks in the first round and get you some kind of cracks at guys. Wes, I think that could put the Steelers in some serious contention to get two swings at guys who could get you value right now, who start this year and are helping you flip your roster into the future.
Yeah, and maybe you use that, that logic of as well, too, the fifth-year option being worth it to go up and get these guys.
Yep.
And maybe that's how you blend what we were just talking about as well, too, Chris, the desire to want to always have an open window, to always be positioning yourself to contend every single year and not, do the roller coaster thing where you're up and down and you're trying to load up for certain years. You're still playing the long game there with 2 first-round draft picks without giving up a ton of capital, playing it smart with potentially being able to have fifth-year options for both of those guys as well, while you're improving your chance for those guys to have an immediate impact and be contributors this season and to help you in 2023 as well, too. So the more we talk about this, the more we look at the value of this and how realistic it is, well, too, from a movement standpoint here. This feels like a really, potentially savvy and smart way for the Steelers to go about, again, fulfilling both of those needs of trying to really take advantage of what you have right now with this era with a young quarterback who you're not going to have to pay for a few years, while at the same time not completely mortgaging the future.
Right, exactly, and that's the thing. You're not, and this is the beauty of what Omar Khan has set the organization up with this Bears trade, is that they could do this, and it wouldn't mortgage the future. You're talking about a 3rd or a 4th round pick to get those guys instead of giving up a future first or a future second, or something that where that they could get that immediate help in. And again, the Steelers don't have to do this. They could, if they want to, relax. But also, I think it's important to point out, if you combine that 3rd and that second round pick, that could also get you the value of the Chiefs' final pick. So you can even get back-to-back picks this draft, according to this draft chart. But let's talk about some of the players that they could get with these picks. And we're talking about guys, when we're going around and we're looking at positions, offensive tackles, cornerbacks, defensive linemen, linebackers. And we'll throw in wide receiver because some people want to look at that as well. But now we're talking about, if it's 17 overall, you managed to get one of the guys that you didn't expect to slip that far. That's awesome. But now you're talking about maybe having a shot at a guy like a DeJuan Jones, a Darnell Wright. John Michael Schmitz is a center who everyone's going to be looking at. Maybe you go get your wide receiver that you think is going to be the ultimate pair with that second first-round pick that you traded back up into. Again, DeJuan Jones being a guy offensive tackle, maybe one of those late corners that's kind of floating around in the back end of the first round. I think there's a lot of potential to do that if the Steelers want to be aggressive to get back up in the later part of the first round.
Yeah, there absolutely is, Chris, and that's again part of this too, and it's why it's fun speculation season right now, is because all these different avenues are possible depending on how the board in front of you falls, right? And kind of what you were just talking about with the Steelers moving up potentially back into the first round. And, the old adage of it taking 2 to tango. Like, you need to have a partner who's willing to move.
This isn't Madden.
It's not just as simple as, exactly,
yeah.
We want to move up. We've got the value here to move up, so we're going to move up. You need another team who's willing to move down, who's willing to do all these things with you. But that, to me, is part of that, too, is just knowing how the board falls, which we won't until the draft. We'll get some more clarity here over obviously the combine next week, and then again when teams act in free agency and start to spend some money in certain areas, and maybe that moves priorities and positions of need off the table for certain teams. But it's certainly fun to kind of look at everything this time of year. And listen, I hope that they are, that the Steelers, they're having all these same conversations, they're doing all these same exercises, and I do think as a Steelers fan, this is important. You should believe that them, however you want to label it, being aggressive, maybe is the best way to label it, is a realistic possibility. Because, again, we've seen the Steelers, even at the end of the Kevin Colbert era, start to veer off of what we always thought was a traditional conservative, build everything through the draft and never really shake the tree method. They've been more active in free agency. They've been more active on the trade market. They went out and got a guy mid-season a few years ago in Minka Fitzpatrick, giving up their first-round pick, something that they hadn't done since the 60s. They went and traded Chase Claypool this season for a pick in the middle of the year, something that they rarely ever do, just trading an asset for a pick in the middle of the year. This is an interesting time to be a Steeler fan and to see how they're going to operate here. And I think, again, you're doing a good job here with this exercise of kind of laying out all the different avenues that are a real possibility as we sit here now in late February.
So just live while we're here, I did this just to mess around. I looked at trying to trade with the PFF mock draft simulator, and I looked at what trades would be likely. The one where it kind of seemed to fringe at was right around that Jets value. If I traded the 4th round pick with the 32nd overall pick to get up into the 1st round, and the place where there was the big cutoff of likelihood and unlikelihood was the Giants and the Jaguars. So I looked at the Giants value. So basically, in this mock that I was just doing in the background here, the Paris Johnson fell to 17. I jumped all over that because they need an offensive tackle. They need offensive linemen, and he's one of the better ones in this draft class. So sitting there, if then you waited until 25, and again, this is just a computer simulation. This is just PFF's board. This is not exactly how it's going to fall out. The top guys available, if you were to trade up to the 25th overall pack in this simulation, you have cornerback Joey Porter Jr., wide receiver Zay Flowers, Michael Mayer the tight end from Notre Dame, Anton Harrison, another offensive tackle, this one from Oklahoma, Will McDonald IV, an edge rusher from Iowa State, Antonio Johnson, the big-bodied safety from Texas A&M, Osiris Torrance, a guard from Florida, Luke Musgrave, tight end from Oregon State. These are the type of players that if they pull this off, they would have a good shot at much less competition to get. So imagine, we've talked about, corner, offensive line, this whole year with some of the top guys out there. Imagine if the Steelers were able to get a Paris Johnson type offensive tackle and a Joey Porter Jr., the guy that everyone's been screaming for because of who his dad was, and he was very good at Penn State. Imagine if the Steelers were able to get 2 players of that caliber in the 1st round, and they were hits. That, to me, essentially, you will have traded Chase Claypool and a 4th round pick for a 1st round pick.
Right.
And I think that is where there's merit to what Robert from Lakeland, Florida, and Alderdice was saying.
And you hit on both of those 1st round picks, and man, you're feeling like $1 million, right? And you've got those guys locked up long term without having to pay them. And that's huge. I mean, you can do, Chris, a little bit of what the New York Jets did last year, right?
Yeah.
I mean, we all just saw they had the offensive rookie of the year, they had the defensive rookie of the year, and some might argue that Breece Hall was, would have been in that conversation as well too if he would have been healthy. Yeah. It's amazing how quick you can kind of find guys, and if they're the right fit and they're ready to contribute, it can really take off. And that's what the Steelers have the opportunity to do here. They're not in the top 10 drafting position that I know some people wished and maybe even hoped for that they would be at times throughout this past season. But as you can see from this exercise, I mean, they could very easily, realistically have 2 picks in the top 30, in the top 27, 26, 25 range.
Yeah.
And man, you hit on those 2 guys, and you are in great shape with what you already did in your last couple draft classes. And with the core of veterans that you have, particularly on the defensive side of the football as well.
I think that's certainly something to measure up. Let's talk about the other side, though, the possibility of trading down and what that could get for the Steelers, because that's also something to keep in mind of. We'll talk about that in just a minute here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. So don't go anywhere. It's Chris Carter here on the Locked On Steelers podcast with Wes Uhler. We'll be right back. Back here on the Locked On Steelers podcast, I'm your host, Chris Carter, joined by Wes Uhler of Steeler Nation Radio. We're talking about potential trade options here in the draft. And again, we're using the Draft Tech trade chart that we've been kind of showcasing the entire show here. Wes, looking at the possibility of trading down, because that's always something that could be an option here. The whole point of trading down, I think, this year wouldn't be to get, they could get, a 5th or a 6th round pick if they wanted. But I truly think that the Steelers, they have an opportunity to either get 2 of those 1st round guys, or if they feel like that's not the best option there, they could trade down, stay in the 1st round, and then let's say they drop down to where the Giants are, 25th overall. You still get a shot at a guy in the top 25. That gets you, according to this chart, about 230 points of value, which would account for like a 3rd round pick by itself. Maybe you could sweeten the pot by that 4th rounder to boost it up a little bit. But if you're looking at the value there, you're talking about the 72nd overall pick, the Titans' third round pick there. But if you threw in maybe your 4th round pick just to sweeten the pot, you could be moving up into the territory of, like, say, the Chiefs and the Eagles second round picks. So then you'd have 3 second round picks with there. And that's where I do think there is value increasing your day 2 picks, because this is a deep draft class with corner value. I think there's reasonable values of offensive weapons. I think there's offensive linemen that you could take really good shots at. We've talked about guys like Matthew Bergeron, the offensive tackle from Syracuse, how he could fit into there. I think I don't think this is an especially great linebacker class, but I think this is a linebacker class that has interesting day 2 value, where Trenton Simpson is a guy from Clemson. We'll see how he tests, but if you can get him in the second round while making sure that you've solidified your offensive line, you've gotten your defensive line, you got a corner somewhere in this draft class, that would be important. And maybe the easiest way to do that is making sure that you have potentially 4 day 2 picks, and day 2, of course, being the second and third rounds of the NFL draft. What are your thoughts about the potential of trading back from that 17th spot? Is that too much value to give up, considering this team does have to fill holes in the roster?
So it's interesting, because you're right. They do have to fill holes on the roster. But I also, Chris, to me, this conversation comes down to a priority of, okay, are you more concerned about adding more bodies? Are you more concerned about your depth? Or are you more concerned with going out and maybe finding 1 or 2 high-end talented pieces with higher ceilings potentially is there as well too? I think that's where I lean in this conversation. When you look at the Steelers right now, do they have areas of concern with depth? Yeah, absolutely. Every NFL team does. We could talk about the cornerback position and what happens with Cam Sutton and what happens with Ahkello Witherspoon and with William Jackson, right? I mean, we could talk about that. There's certainly areas of depth concern on this team. Linebacker, off-ball linebacker could become one, obviously, with what feels like the pending departure of Devin Bush and the unknown status of Robert Spillane as well, too. But, man, I still think with what we saw down the stretch, with, again, what is a nice nucleus of veterans on that defense and a young offense that really showed growth, and by all means, you should be excited about the potential steps forward that they could take in year 2, and then in year 3 for guys like Najee Harris and Pat Freiermuth, who are key parts of this offense as well, too. To me, if you're asking me, hey, 2 players where you're taking a risk in the first round, higher potential there, or 4 draft picks, where you've got a little bit more ammo on day 2, I think I'm still leaning towards, let's try and hit some home runs here. Let's go and get an offensive lineman in the first round, and then let's go and maybe get a playmaker on defense in the first round, or another playmaker for Kenny Pickett, whatever that case may be. But as you mentioned, too, it is safe to say this feels like a pretty consensus deep draft where there is a lot of talent and value with those second-day picks. If that's something that the Steelers do think is really exceptional, above average in this draft class, then I would obviously want them to take a long look at that as well, too.
Let's get to Jason from South Carolina, because he had a question just about this topic. Here's Jason, who called in with a question. By the way, you can call in to get on the show, 412-223-6644. Leave your name, where you're from, and a message. Keep it under a minute so we can put it here. Jason, he had a question.
Hi, Chris. This is Jason Whittingham, Orangeburg, South Carolina. I have another question. There are teams who can master the art of the trade down. This year, the Pittsburgh Steelers only had 6 selections. If after the first or second draft pick, where do we use? Do you think we should use that second or third round draft pick as a trade down so that we can collect more draft picks and able to fill more holes? We're short of money and we need more draft picks. That's something that we normally don't do. What do you think?
So going along with Jason here and looking at the chart. By the way, thank you, Jason, for your call. Wes, it is hard for me to argue with you. Man, 2 first rounders sounds great right now for what the Steelers could do. So I think in principle I agree. But going to Jason's point that they only have what 6? He said 6 draft picks. Do they have 6 draft picks? It is 6. Okay, yeah. No, it's 7. It's 7.
I think he said 6, but it is 7. Yeah,
right. So there's 7. There's 7 draft picks, but 2 of them are 7th rounders.
Correct.
Really, even when
no 5th round pick, no 6th round pick,
and that's where I think he has a point. But to Jason's point, and I think what some people will point out with the Steelers, there are plenty of needs on this roster. Like you talked about, the only linebacker who's signed and proven right now is Miles Jack, and he's signed for a pretty hefty salary cap hit. The offensive line needs rework. You want to find Cam Hayward a long-term partner, or eventually his heir to leading the defensive line, if it's not already DeMarvin Leal. You want to find edge depth. You want to find a cornerback at some point. You might need to find a safety because neither Terrell Edmonds or DeMonte KZ are signed right now to the Steelers. They're pending free agents right now. So I get the idea of trading back and seeing if you can add a second, a third, even a fourth round pick to the Steelers right now. But man, it's tough to weigh that against the chance of getting 2 day one starters at key positions. And then still, like if we're talking, again, what you and I are talking about is not about trading the farm to do that. We're talking about trading that 4th round pick. So yeah, your day 3 is going to be boring. Like, well, not for us. Our day 3 is going to be light. Like let's say the day 3 of the draft is 4th, 5th, 6th, and 7th rounds. As guys who cover the Steelers, we will be chilling if they trade that 4th round pick. Like they'll have 2 7th rounders, all good. Right. Well, that's all fine.
We'll see at the end of the day.
But is that 1 4th round pick worth more than moving up that 2nd round pick to get yourself a shot at another 1st rounder so that you can maybe have again 2 starters right away? And then you'd still have that, wouldn't eliminate your natural 2nd round pick or your natural 3rd round pick. So you're talking about 2 first rounders, a 2nd rounder, and a 3rd rounder. To me, I can live with that. So I think I'm more so, and again, there's other things they could do. They could trade down from 17 and get more capital that way. But I'm with you. This is a year where they need starters. They need young guys to come in who they don't have to pay big money for the next 4 or 5 years, because right now they're paying, even though they have Kenny Pickett on a rookie contract, TJ Watt, $30 million cap hit. Minka Fitzpatrick, big cap hit. Cam Hayward, big cap hit. Chuks Okorafor, $13 million. Miles Jack, $13 million. There's a lot of
James
contracts.
Daniels,
you got a lot of contracts like that right now. Get some starters who don't cost you that much, who are hits and contributors right now.
Absolutely agree. I think that's the easiest way to build a roster in any salary cap sport, point blank, period, is to hit on your high-end rookies that you can have for a while without having to pay them, particularly the quarterback, which you've already done here with young Kenny Pickett. Chris, that to me is a very interesting conversation, and one that I might steal on Steelers Nation Radio that we just had here. But
just make sure I'm on the segment.
The beauty of this too is we might get an idea. We will get an idea how the Steelers are thinking in just a couple weeks. If they're very aggressive in free agency and they go out and they re-sign Cam Sutton and they bring back Robert Spillane and they go out and they nab a couple other guys, well then we'll think, all right, well maybe you don't need those extra mid picks all of a sudden, right? Maybe you just need 2 guys who you can roll out on week 1 and will have impact for you. Maybe you don't need 4 guys out of this draft right away. If it's the other way around, if Cam Sutton ends up leaving and maybe you don't bring back Robert Spillane, maybe you need a safety as well too now all of a sudden, then you're thinking, all right, you know what, we really could use another 4th round pick or another 5th round pick, maybe somebody who's going to be able to have some type of an impact this season. It'll be real interesting, and we're right on the precipice of that. I'm excited, with obviously the combine next week and then free agency right around the corner.
Absolutely. Wes, there's a lot to talk about as far as trade values. This is really, again, these are just trying to help people understand the values of where things are so that when they're talking about it, they're not saying crazy things like, oh yeah, they can trade the 3rd rounder for a 1st rounder. It's just that easy. But understanding what it takes to move up, move down, and where the Steelers could find guys for the right value. Ultimately, it'll be up to Omar Khan in that front office. Like you said, he is set to talk with Steelers reporters at the combine. That'll be a fun one. So we'll see what he says there, and if we can get any insight onto the Steelers' plans. Wes, thanks so much for joining us here in the Locked On Steelers podcast. You're the man as always. Let people know they can find you, follow you, and get more of your work.
Yeah, at Wesley Uhler on Twitter. I host the Steelers Blitz with Arthur Moats on Steelers Nation Radio. You can catch us there at noon. You can also just get us in podcast form wherever you get your podcasts. Steelers Blitz there. We will have 6 hours of live shows every day from the Combine next week. So if you are a football junkie and you're looking for some live Combine Steelers-specific content, make sure you're checking us out on SNR next week. And then as Chris is always kind enough to plug for me, if you are a tortured Mountaineer soul who little extra piece of you dies every time you see the number 13 and 9 in the same proximity. Ears and Beers and In the Gun, those are the podcasts that I host that are for my fellow tortured WVU souls out there.
I hear you on that. Do check out Wes. He does a lot of great work all the time. And definitely check him out. Steeler Nation Radio, him and Moats do an awesome job. The Migos will ride again sometime soon. Anyways, Wes, thanks so much for joining us. I'm Chris Carter, your host on the Locked On Steelers podcast. Find me on Twitter and Instagram at Carter Critiques. Read my work at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, where I cover all things Pitt athletics. You can also find this show on all podcast platforms, but especially on YouTube. Like this video if you enjoy it. Subscribe to this YouTube channel to get all your daily Monday through Friday episodes. Also, if you want to help out the show, go on Apple Podcasts, rate us 5 stars with a positive comment. You do both at the same time, you get a shout out at the end of the show. We're back tomorrow with Jenna Harner, wrapping up the week right here on the Locked On Steelers podcast.